Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerd Unite podcast, I'm joined by Roland Mann, former editor of Malibu and Marvel Comics, and creator of Silverline Comics, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this.
Hey guys, this is Ashley Cox from Fangirling Over Jesus. At FOJ, we believe in hope and light in the darkness and that you are not alone. We seek to unite and celebrate the intersection of the gospel and our favorite fandoms, and we get to do this through our social media, our podcast devotional, and our cosplay and fashion. And you can find links to all of that through our website, www.fangirlingoverjesus.com, through our social media at FangirlingOverJesus, wherever you get your podcasts, and on Etsy. See you online.
And lead me on to your kingdom come, surrendering, let your work be done. My life I give for the glory of your Son.
I want you to know how much I appreciate you listening and watching the Christian Nerds Unite podcast every week. We're part of the Christian Nerd HQ podcast network, and we drop new content every weekday. Christian Nerds Unite on Mondays, Tatooine Sun on Tuesdays, Fangirling Over Jesus on Wednesdays, and The Reverend and the Reprobate on Thursdays, and the Speaking Nerdy podcast every Friday. Go to ChristianNerdHQ.com to follow all the podcasts and check out the Christian Nerd HQ YouTube channel for even more great content. Let's start with some scripture. Matthew 13:33 through 35. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Jesus always taught in parables. He always used stories to convey deep meaning. These stories helped bring the gospel to life. To connect it with what people already knew, we can use the stories we tell today to communicate the truth of the gospel as well. Whether that's through short stories, sermons, comics, or even collaborative storytelling like tabletop role-playing games. I hope that you will consider how you can use great storytelling to communicate the gospel in fresh ways to people. Now for some nerdy news. The Blue Beetle finally knocks Barbie out of the #1 spot at the box office this past weekend, with a fairly low $25 million domestically and only $43 million worldwide. Based on Rotten Tomatoes, critics and audiences both like the film, critics giving 76% and an audience score of 92%. And that's the highest rating for a DC theatrical release since The Suicide Squad. Barbie and Oppenheimer come in second and third. Looking at all the films in theaters reporting, this is the lowest overall box office weekend since April of this year. Box office numbers will need to stay up the rest of the year to be better than last year. Researchers have discovered a new species of snake in Peru's Andes Mountain and named the variety after Harrison Ford. The species is called Tachymenodes, Harrison Fordy. This is not the first time an animal has been named after Ford. He has also inspired the name of an ant and a spider. Ford was quoted as saying, "These scientists keep naming critters after me, but it's always the ones that terrify children. I don't understand. I spend my free time cross-stitching. I sing lullabies to my basil plants so they won't fear the night." Zachary Levi, who has been playing the DCEU's Shazam, has once again spoken out and is making news for it. In the past, he has said critics are unkind in their reviews, and in July, he said that the actor strike rules were dumb since he cannot share with the fans about any of his previous work because he is there for the fans. This week, he slammed studios at a comic convention. He told the audience, quote, I personally feel like the amount of content that comes out of Hollywood that is garbage, they don't care enough to actually make it great for you guys. They don't. How many times do you watch a trailer and go, oh my God, this looks so cool? Then you go to the movies and it's like, this was what I get? They know that once you've already bought the ticket, you're in the seat, they've got your money. And the only way for us to change any of it is to not go to the garbage. We have to actively not choose the garbage. It'll help. It'll help a lot. Zachary Levi definitely had some strong opinions there. Hopefully this does not affect Levi's future as a movie superhero. I recently connected with Roland Mann, former editor for Malibu and Marvel Comics, working on titles like Dinosaurs for Hire and X-Mutants and the Ultraverse, and currently running a Kickstarter for his independent imprint, Silverline Comics. Let's get right into our interview. Roland Mann, it is so great to have you on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to get to hear a little bit more of your story. So let's start with just kind of tell the audience a little bit about who Roland Mann is and why maybe they might have heard of you before.
Sure. Yeah, most people, I've been working in comics since the late 80s. I got started with a book called Cat and Mouse. It was a black and white independent comic. It was in the, well, I know you're from the Atlanta area. It was in the Comic Shop News top 10 black and white for about half of the run. The highest we ever made it was number 4, which I was very, very excited about. But then I went on to, and I did a few other things, mostly for Malibu Comics as a writer. But then Malibu hired me to be an editor. So I moved out to California and I became an editor at Malibu Comics, where I edited titles like Protectors, Dinosaurs for Hire, X-Mutants, yep.
Yes.
Called the Genesis line. And then while I was busy doing that, Malibu created something called the Ultraverse. And the Ultraverse came in and just started selling gonzos. And so Malibu decided that they couldn't have competing lines, because the Genesis line was basically superheroes. It was independent superheroes. And that's what the Ultraverse was. So they decided to cancel the Protectors line, or the Genesis line. And then I moved over to the Ultraverse, where I edited titles like Strangers, Nightman, Sludge, Prototype. Roughly half-ish of the titles there are the ones that I edited until Marvel bought us. I became a Marvel editor, and then of course anyone who knows that story, Marvel declared bankruptcy and then fired a whole bunch of people. That was kind of my training ground, and it was after that I went and started Silverline Comics, which is what I do today. In the 90s, though, what happened is I started it at the wrong time, because my brain should have said, hey, Marvel declared bankruptcy. If the number one comic publishing company declared bankruptcy, why do you think that you're going to go out there and make some money as a little independent? I lost a lot of money and stopped publishing comics, and that's when I got saved. I don't know that one of them had to do with the other. Some people ask me that. Well, is that why you got saved? I'm like, I don't think that my failures at one led to another. I think God just put me in a place that I needed to be, and I gave my life to the Lord. But then when that happened, that's when I quit comics. I quit writing. I quit all this stuff, and I actually considered ministry for a while. Couldn't make that happen, and I with some soul searching, I realized I'm going off. See, I told you I chase rabbits. Long story short, after a few years passed, I got back into writing, And then a few years ago, I relaunched Silverline, which is what I do today. So
Awesome.
if
Well,
people know me, they probably know me for my time spent at Malibu.
very cool. Well, that's actually when I looked at your list of comics, Malibu was the first thing that popped out to me.
Okay,
And
cool.
then I went looking for the two major titles that I had happened to read back then, which were Dinosaurs for Hire and the X
Mutants.
Mutants. So it's kind of interesting that you happen to be editing those.
Both of them.
So
Yep.
so talk to us a little bit about working in the industry now. First off, let's start with Cat and Mouse. You're
Hmm.
way back in the day. Now were you the artist? Were you just the writer? What was that like as an
I was.
independent?
Yeah, I was just the writer. As fates would have it, I met two super talented artists when I was in college. Now, I had been sending out submission letters, proposals to Marvel, DC, and some of the top independent publishers at the time. First, Kamiko,
Okay. Yep.
from of the '80s,
Oh yeah,
and
I remember. I remember. I always pronounced it Comico, but
right, I did too back
I
then.
remember them. I used to read the old Grindel and
Nice.
yeah, and
Did you read
later on
Elementals?
Robotech. I
Mhm.
didn't read Elementals.
Okay, I managed to write a Vortex miniseries.
Hmm.
Vortex was one of the elementals, and I managed to write a Vortex
Okay.
miniseries in I think either '90 or '91, real early on for me. Um, but anyway, I met these two artists. Actually, I met the one artist, Stephen Butler, who went on to become still is my dear friend today. And he and I, had a conversation. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, I want to draw comics. Oh, I want to write comics. And so we immediately just became, instant friends. And we compared rejection letters. He had a stack of rejection letters, and I had a stack of them. And so he and I began talking about what we thought we could do. And keep in mind, this would have been about a year after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were published.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
some people
I was
forget that
I was gonna say that you mentioned you were in the black and whites.
yep,
Yeah, I was like, and the time frame. I was like, that is like a TNMT like number one. That's
yes,
Aardvark or not
Art
Aardvark.
Vanheim.
Yeah, Vanheim.
Yeah,
Yeah, all that stuff was going on. Those independents were like, this was a new thing, and
yep.
people are super buying into it.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So I often, will tip my hat to the Turtles because they did open up the black and white market, and
Oh,
that's what we were
absolutely.
able to, that's what we were able to do with Cat and Mouse. But what happened is Stephen and I we talked a bit. We talked to well, why don't we just? And that's kind of one of the things we decided. We said, well, let's just do our own thing. And he goes, hey, I've got a roommate of mine. There were suites back then, and he's like, I got a roommate of mine who's also a super talented artist. And I said, okay, cool, the more the merrier to me, because I'd been years trying to find artists,
Yeah.
as a writer who knows a little bit about drawing but can't draw. I was
Mhm.
always on the search for an artist, and so I stumbled across this guy who was super talented, very influenced by George Perez, and so he introduces me to his roommate, a guy by the name of Mitch Bird. And Mitch didn't. I mean, he wasn't super into comics, but he was super into drawing, and he loved science fiction and fantasy. And he had this little thing that he had drawn up. Didn't really have. He hadn't. It was just something he had drawn. He had several of them, little shorts. And I
Okay.
latched on to one, and I'm like, "What can you tell me about this one?" He goes, I don't know." So I took those 4 pages, came up with a story, and went back to Stephen and Mitch and said, "Here's what I got," and we tossed around some ideas a little bit. That became Cat and Mouse.
Oh wow.
We decided, look, if the Turtles can do it, we can do it. Let's publish this ourselves, right? Now, I got to set the picture for you though. I'm in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is not really a publishing mecca. So
Yes.
Stephen and I, we put on our ties and we go around to the banks and we say, hey, we'd like to get a loan to print this comic book. Now, I'm about to exaggerate an accent, and it's going to sound like I'm poking fun. And I'm not poking fun at I love my state. I love Mississippi. I love being from Mississippi. But what I'm poking fun at is what they're saying. Okay. Now, what would happen? And there were about, I don't know, 10-ish banks. We went to every single one of them. And this was about the same response that we got from them. You want a loan for what? You want to print a comic book? Well, I ain't ever give no loan for no comic book before. You want a tractor? Can you use a tractor with that? Well, no, sir, we don't need any tractors. Well, I'd give you a loan for a tractor, I think, but comic books? We could not get a loan. And I'm talking, I can't remember. I got paperwork still. I want to say it was something like, I don't know, $3,000. It wasn't very big.
Wow.
And here's the deal, okay? We had purchase orders. This is when there were still about a dozen distributors, right? So we had purchase orders from Diamond, from Capital, Friendly Franks, from was a Hawaiian one. Several of them. We had purchase orders, guaranteed money, right? Yep. And we said, this is what we're going to use for collateral. These guys are buying our books, but we got to print them. Well, we couldn't get a loan. We couldn't get anybody to give us a loan. So we canceled the orders.
Oh.
We took but here's the thing that we did that a lot of creators I don't think are forward thinking enough to do. We kept working on the books. We just kept. We were like, hey, we're just gonna make books, right? We were making comics. I think Mitch was already drawing by the time this happened. Mitch was already drawing issue number 3 or 4.
Oh, wow.
I was right. Yeah, I was right, like number 5, something like that. And so we took them and we sent them out to a few publishers. And our comic shop guy said, "Hey, I know a guy in New York who is looking for some talent and some books." So we ended up with EF Graphics. EF Graphics published their version of our comic. So we were going to do it in '88, right? They published their version of Cat and Mouse in color in '89, and then they went belly up.
Oh.
So, but as they went belly up, he shipped us a whole bunch of comic books, right? Here's like, I don't know, like 500. Here's like 500 comic books here. I don't need them. I'm clearing out my warehouse. You can do what you want, right? So we took those, we took our photocopies, and we sent them out again. This time we targeted the places. We targeted First and Kamiko and those places, right? We're like, okay, well, we kind of got this thing now, and we're on a roll with it. Mm-hmm. And that's how we ended up with Malibu. And then Malibu printed their number 1 with a Jackson Geis? Was it Jackson Geis? Cover. Anyway, so they're number 1, and of course, then the rest is, as they say, is history. And Cat and Mouse ran for about 2 years. So it led to more work for me, it led to more work for Mitch, and led to more work for Steven. So
very cool. Well,
yeah.
So once you were in with Malibu, is that kind of did you almost immediately start writing for other titles, or were you said you moved into an editor position at one point with them? What did your adventure with Malibu look like?
Sure. So after we signed the deal with Cat and Mouse, I became friendly with them. And of course, like any good freelancer, I mean, what else you got for me? You got anything else I can write? Well, we don't have anything. So one of the things I loved about it is, right, so one of the things I started doing was packaging. This is ultimately how I got to become an editor. But what I would do is being from Mississippi, I would travel around to the shows, local to us, and I'd meet a guy in New Orleans who could draw like crazy, right? And he's like, "Hey, what do you want to do?" "Oh, I want to draw comic books, but I don't want to move to New York." That was the most common thing that I heard traveling around, is that nobody wanted to go to New York. Nobody wanted to go to New York, but they all wanted to draw comics, right?
Right.
Back then, that was kind of the expectation, is that if you wanted to draw comics, you were going to move to New York and Marvel and DC, right?
Yep.
And so I would meet these guys, and I would say, "Hey, either you want to, I've got a story, do you want to draw it? Or, hey, I know this writer, we'll put together," and I just started packaging stories from Malibu. I'm like, "Hey, I got this, you want to take a look at it?" Like, yeah. So that's kind of how my relationship with Malibu went. And like I said, I would call them up. Hey, you got any more work for me? I need something. They would always tell me no. Tom Mason is the one I talked to, who's the guy who wrote Dinosaurs for Hire.
Okay, yeah.
He's the one who I talked to most of the time. He would always tell me no. But then he'd call me the next day and he goes, hey, I got this thing for you. So I got more work out of calling and having him tell me no, and then him calling me back the next day. So and I just did a whole bunch of small things for them that from about 90 to about 92, and then in 92 that's when they hired me and I moved out to California. So you're looking at what, a year and a half, maybe 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the difference between being a writer for comics versus moving into the editor seat for comics.
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion that part of what the industry lacks today, and I don't imagine that that's where we're going with this conversation at all, but I'm of the opinion that part of what the industry lacks, particularly in the bigger publishers, are good editors.
Okay.
I think that probably the late 80s, maybe even the early 90s, kind of saw the last of the good comic book editors, and we could probably talk for hours on that alone. But I'm of the opinion that it's not the editor's job to write the story, and that is the inclination. I think sometimes people hear, oh well, the editor just took it over and made it their story, and I understand that. My belief and opinion about an editor's job is it's my job to get the very best out of you while protecting the property, right? So if I'm editing Spider-Man, for instance, it's my job to get to tell you what Spider-Man story to write, but to have you say, here's my Spider-Man story, and then have me get that best story out of you while protecting Spider-Man. Where you say, well, I want to make him have one eye. Well, you can't do that. I'm sorry. You can't poke his eye out, right? But the rest of your story still works, right?
Very cool. Well, so along the way, is there any particular stories that kind of stand out to you that you say, this was a moment where I was super proud of the work we were doing, or is there a particular product other than, anything that's your first and that's kind of your baby?
Yeah.
I know that's special, but is there any moment that you went, this is something special that I got to do along the way?
Yeah, I think I know. If there are any Ultraverse for Malibu fans listening, they want me to say Ultraverse, I'm sure. But that's not what my answer is going to be. While at Malibu, I was particularly proud of what we were doing in the Genesis line. I was particularly proud of the stories that were being told in the X-Mutants, in Dinosaurs for Hire, and in the Protectors. I thought we were telling some very good stories that I don't think a lot of get a lot of credit today. And I think the Ultraverse came along and it was equipped with all these big high profile name writers that got got the attention, and I get it, right? But when I look back at my time at Malibu, it was the whole Genesis line. Today it would be the Silverline, of course, right? That's what I look at what we've done at Silverline just the past few years. And I go, wow, this is pretty awesome, right? But as far as the Malibu time goes, it has to be my time with Genesis. And I'll tell you another thing about that. One of the things that made me realize, okay, this is real, right? This is not a dream. This is real. And that's when I got to call and talk with George Perez and ask him to do a cover for me.
Oh, wow.
I mean, come on. And if you look back at those covers, you see I got to work with some pretty talented. I got to work with Kurt Swan. I got to work with Jerry Bingham. I got to work with Dan Jurgens. Kelly Jones did a Gravestone cover for me. There was some super talented folks I got to work with just in the Genesis line. But it was really having a conversation with George Perez that made me go, "This is real, isn't it? I'm really doing this. They're paying me to do this. What the heck?"
Now, so what was it like going from during the buyout? When Marvel purchased Malibu, what was that? Was that just insane turmoil and trying to figure out how to do things, or was that like, hey, we're part of one of the big two now? What did that feel like?
That was actually it. Now, that wasn't the universal feeling, but for most of us in house, we kind of knew that we had, the industry was crashing, it was dying, and we kind of knew that we were having, budget issues, we were having cash flow problems. Now, I never saw the books, no one ever showed me, but when you're kind of a senior level editor, you kind of know some of those things, and so we knew that we were having those issues, and when the idea that Marvel was going to purchase us, it's like, what? We're not going to die, right? That was the thought. The thought is like we have suddenly have access to revenue, or not revenue, but access to money that would keep us from collapsing. We might have to make some changes. Of course, we knew that,
Mhm.
but it was the kind of thing. It's like, oh, cool, we'll still be making comics next year because we're going to be part of Marvel. So there was a lot of excitement in the office because it looked like we were, I don't know if every company does this, but Malibu was young. They hadn't been around. I think '86 was the year they started.
Mhm.
I came in '90 as a freelancer in '90, as an employee in '92. So you're still talking. It was a young company,
Yeah.
and so even in the back of your mind, there's still all these. Well, how long is this going to last? I mean, is this really going to last that long, or And of course, knowing that you had the kind of cash issues that you had, it's like,
Mhm.
well, how long? So when Marvel bought the company, we're like, hey, yes, that solves everything. And that's what many of us thought. I will tell you someone who did not think that, though. Um, we had, as one of our tasks as editors, one of the things that we were tasked with doing is calling all of our freelancers and telling them so that they wouldn't hear it through the grapevine.
Oh yeah.
Now, this was 94, so it's not really pre-internet. We already had email, and we were working with email and that kind of stuff. But we were still reading the Comic Buyer's Guide, and Peter
Yep.
David and Hulk Rider. The Hulk artist, Eric Larson. They were still
Oh yeah.
having their name withheld argument. In the Comic Buyer's Guide. So it was a different time. So it was on us to call them all. When I called Steve Gerber and told him the first words out of his mouth, and I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember them exactly now. It's like, well, it's over. It was fun. It was nice working with you, Roland. It's like he hated Marvel. He hated Marvel with a passion, and so I tried to be encouraging and say, Steve, hey, it's still us. You're gonna still be working with us. You're not working with Marvel. Yeah, it's all over. It was fun while it lasted, but yeah. So Steve was the only one that I talked to that was just like, yeah, we're done.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so when something like that happens, maybe you don't know all the ins and outs of this, but when something like this happens, Malibu had all these properties, this IP. Um, you know, does Marvel still hold all that IP, or do you know if they sold that off to somebody else at some point, or do you know where
So
that actually went?
yeah, so there's two aspects, right? So Malibu still did a handful of creator-owned content, things like Dinosaurs for Hire. That is owned by Tom Mason.
Oh, okay.
But then the Ultraverse was designed to be owned by the company, right? Because one of the things that they wanted to do is, hey, we want to own it. That way, if you leave, we can still publish it and build
Yeah.
maybe this is Prime is the next Spider-Man. Maybe that was kind of the idea. When Marvel bought the company, they own it, all of that, lock, stock, and barrel. They own the Ultraverse outright. No questions. No. Well, it says this. Nope. They own it. Everything that Malibu owned, they own.
So do you know do you know if any of those Ultraverse characters have moved into the Marvel universe at all?
Well, there's a big Ultraverse group on Facebook, and if you recall the Thor movie in Planet Hulk, where has Hulk, where he goes and
Oh,
fights
yeah.
Hulk, right? There was a character on there called Topaz. She is almost a spitting image of Topaz from the Ultraverse.
Oh, wow.
So there are a lot of people who are like, "That's her. That's her. We believe that's her." There's no reference to her being that from that world, but there's so many similarities that it has to be. That's the only one that I know of.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as far as you know, they haven't sold the IP off.
Mm-mm.
So they just have this IP that's not being utilized.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is.
I always wonder about those kind of things. It's like, do you hold this IP because you just don't want competition, or do you hold this IP thinking one day we might use this, or is it one of those? Yeah, we bought this. Just put it in the closet. Don't worry about it.
Right. Well, so true story is Marvel bought it simply to keep us away from DC. That's the only reason. If you search on the internet, you're going to see this long running rumor, and even though everybody at Malibu has tried to squash it, you'll find that the reason Marvel bought Malibu was for the coloring department. That's not true. There's no truth in that at all. In fact, Marvel hated the coloring department. It took them some time to grow to like the coloring department, and they did. They ended up growing. I mean, they ended up growing to like it, chiefly because of Mark Grunwald. Mark Grunwald was a very influential person there at Marvel, and once he liked the coloring department, everybody did, right? But so what had happened is DC had been doing due diligence on Malibu for about 6 months. They had been in the offices discreetly. Only a very few people knew that it was DC people. But they were looking at the offices. They were examining the accounting books. They were doing due diligence as to buy the company. Well, what happened is Marvel heard about it one weekend at a convention. The very next week, right, the very next business day, I think, the Marvel head guy, which was Revlon guy, I don't remember his name now. He was in our offices making an offer.
Oh, wow.
And from what I understand, he basically said, "What did DC offer you? I'll double it."
Oh, wow.
It didn't matter. He just bought it because if you look at the market shares at the time, and I'm going off of jaded memory of 30 years, right? Malibu had about 10 to 15% of the market share.
Which is pretty hefty.
Which is incredibly hefty for an independent, right?
Oh, yeah.
And DC had about 35, and Marvel had anywhere 40 to 45. If you had taken Malibu's 10 to 15% market share and put it onto DC, that would have had DC potentially surpass Marvel in market share. That was a big no-no. Keep in mind, Marvel had just gone public. Their stock had just they've been a private company. Their stock had just gone public. So what they were doing, if you look at Marvel, they were purchasing companies so that they could go to their stockholders and say, "Look at us. We are growing the company. We've purchased Panini stickers. We purchased Heroes World. We purchased Malibu Comics." They were growing the company, right?
Yeah.
So what happens a few years later, everything is, in the crapper. They fire the CEO. What does he do? He trims the fat.
Yeah.
So his task then was go around and trim all of the fat that the last CEO bought. So they killed Heroes World. I'm not really sure what they did with the Panini stickers because Panini's still around.
Okay.
So I don't know what happened to that specifically. And then they killed Malibu, right? So he's like, and then he goes to the shareholders and says, "Look at me, I'm doing a great job. I'm trimming the fat. I'm growing the company." It was simply a corporate maneuvering that we got caught in the middle of.
Ah, so now, if I followed you correctly earlier, uh, when Malibu finally came to an end and you were released from Marvel, you kind of decided you were done, or did
Not yet.
not
Not
yet?
yet.
Okay,
No.
okay,
No. What I did is I decided, hey, I know how to do this now. I remember that I couldn't get a loan, right, from when I first started the book. I'm like, hey, I know
yeah,
how to do this now. I got a little bit of money on my own. I can probably get my own loan. So I just went, of course, credit cards. I had credit cards by then, right? And so I just said, hey, I know how to do this. I'm going to start my own, small press label, and I'm going
yeah.
to make comic books. And so that's how Silverline was born in the late 90s. And I published about 13 comics from 97 to about 2001.
Okay, and that was kind of the time when several small, super small publishers were starting to pop up. But
Yeah, and it's also the time when some of the ones from the 80s went belly up.
yeah, yeah,
So,
that that late, yeah, kind of the mid to late 90s, things kind
yeah.
of went sideways in the
Yes.
industry.
Yes.
And I remember, uh, 93, I'm fresh out of college. And in college, I was deeply involved in comic books, and uh, part of the part of the uh, comic investing craze, where
Yeah.
everything's got uh, multiple covers, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
buy multiple copies because you're going to read one and you're going to save one.
Read one, bag one.
Yeah, read one, bag one. So I was part of that,
Yeah.
and actually spent some time working in a comic shop, so I remember
Oh,
a lot of
cool.
that. But that was all some fun times, and then I got out of college and was like, oh, I have to actually be able to live. Uh,
Right, right. I have to pay my bills now.
yes. So,
Yeah. Well, there
but
was a lot of money in comics in the early 90s.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
a lot of money.
So when your personal company you're starting
Hmm.
up, you ran this for a while. So what made you decide, it's time for me to stop?
My wife,
Okay.
she said, "You were $20,000 in debt because of the comic books, and we can't do this anymore."
Hmm.
And so I gave it up. Yeah, I just said,
Oh, wow.
I was losing money like crazy. Um, and yeah, so she just said, yeah, unless you can figure out a way to actually make money with this, you can't do this anymore. So yeah, I gave it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
And, and then, so what did you do then at that point? Were you doing freelance writing, or did you just go into,
Well,
go get the job? What did
I
that?
was depressed for a little while, and
I
so
can
I
imagine.
I sat around and did nothing for a few months, and then I decided I would be a teacher, and
Okay.
so I went back to school and got an advanced degree and started teaching. So yeah, so which is still what I do for my day job today. I'm a university instructor.
Very cool. And what do you teach right now?
I teach creative writing.
Oh, okay. Great.
I do, yeah.
Very
So
fitting.
I was glad, because I could have ended up, and not that I would have minded so much, but I could have ended up, teaching English comp or
Hmm.
sophomore literature or something like that. But I am very fortunate that I get to teach creative writing and I get to teach comic book writing a lot. So
So you are in the middle of kind of a resurgence. You've
yeah,
got a Kickstarter happening.
so we are kickstarting issue number 4. That means though that you can get issues 1, 2, and 3 if you're like, hey, I'm just now hearing about this.
Hmm.
I missed issues 1, 2, and 3. You can get the whole thing. It's not in a collection yet, so you're still buying, the floppies.
Individual.
We will do a collection, but that's going to be after this, and not immediately after this either. It's gonna we'll give some time, but yeah. So this ends the first miniseries, and I'm already into the second miniseries.
How can people find your Kickstarter?
It's super easy. You go to silverlinecomicscrowdfunder.com.
Awesome.
That will take you right to it. silverlinecomicscrowdfunder.com. No spaces, just one long Silverline Comics Crowdfunder.com.
And if people want to follow you, keep up with what you're doing or what the company is doing, social media wise or whatever, how can people find you and Silverline?
So same. We're on all the social medias. I think there's probably a new one or two that we haven't been able to join yet, but we try to stay on all the social medias. So you can, if you're whatever social media you're on, to find me, you can look for Roland Mann. I usually have a character. It looks just like me, even to the glasses. But that's kind of how it looks. But I add the glasses. Caricature, I should have said, not a character. Caricature. So you can find me on all the social medias, or you can find Silverline Comics on all the social medias. And we would absolutely, and I would absolutely appreciate your follows and your likes and all that kind of stuff.
Roland and I talked so long, I decided to go ahead and split this one up into 2 episodes. So check back next week to hear the rest of our interview. Make sure you check out the links in the show notes below for Roland and for Silverline Comics, and don't forget to support his Kickstarter. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click all those buttons down there, whatever they are, so you can keep up with us and you'll know anytime new content is released. You can find all of our social links and links to our YouTube channel and our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. If you really do enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. All of our levels have great benefits and make a huge difference in the ministry we're able to do. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers we're serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or to partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click support in the menu. And don't forget to check out ChristianNerdHQ.com for more great podcasts. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Romans 16. Now to him who is able to establish you in accordance with my gospel, the message I proclaim about Jesus Christ, in keeping with the revelation of the mystery hidden for long ages past, but now revealed and made known through the prophetic writings by the command of the eternal God, so that all the Gentiles might come to the obedience that comes from faith. To the only wise God be glory forever through Jesus Christ. Amen. We'll see you next week. Blessings.
Hey.